When Grant first told me his cousins were coming to stay with us, I didn't think much of it. Our apartment had always been a revolving door of guests. Friends from work, old teammates passing through, even strangers who became acquaintances over a long weekend. Grant thrived on company, feeding off noise and motion, while I leaned toward quieter nights. Still, we'd managed to make it work. He was the kind of roommate who could charm his way through a late rent payment or talk a landlord into overlooking damage from one of his wild parties. I learned early on that living with him meant tolerating unpredictability. The day his cousins arrived, I realized unpredictability was about to take on an entirely new meaning. 3 of them walked to the door behind him, each carrying duffel bags and easy smiles, and suddenly the apartment felt smaller than it ever had. Mason was the first I noticed, tall with a measured presence, his gaze sharp enough to cut through small talk. He seemed older than the others, though maybe it was just the way he carried himself. Shoulders squared, eyes always calculating. Ryder was the opposite, all mischief and movement, like the world was a stage meant for his performance. He cracked a joke about the creaky stairs before even setting his bag down, and I found myself laughing despite the unease that tugged at me. Julian trailed behind, saying little, his silence deliberate. He had a stillness about him that was harder to read, as if he was watching more than participating. Grant clapped me on the shoulder and introduced me as though I were just another part of the furniture they'd be sharing. "This is him," he said, grinning. "The guy I told you about." The phrase lingered in my head longer than it should have. The guy I told you about. I wondered what he'd said, how much of me he'd exposed, and to what end. For the first few days, I tried convincing myself it was temporary, that the disruption would settle into routine. But the cousins weren't like the other guests who drifted through. They lingered, weaving themselves into my days in ways that felt intentional. Mason started showing up in the kitchen at the same time I brewed coffee, asking questions that skimmed the surface of who I was, yet left me feeling oddly scrutinized. Ryder drifted into the living room during my late-night shows, tossing out comments and sliding into conversations that grew personal before I realized I was letting him in. Julian kept to the edges, though I caught his eyes on me more times than I cared to admit. His silence carried weight, like a question I hadn't yet been asked. Grant, for his part, acted as though nothing had changed. He came and went with his usual careless rhythm, tossing his keys on the counter, leaving messes in his wake, but always laughing, always pretending it was all fine. Yet something about his laughter rang different. It felt forced, strained in ways I hadn't noticed before. The more time I spent with Ryder, the harder it became to ignore the tension threading through the apartment. He had a way of disarming me, of making me forget the walls I'd built. Conversations with him slipped from casual jokes to the kind of questions no one had bothered to ask me in years. He wanted to know what I dreamed about, what I feared, what I wanted when I thought no one was watching. He leaned in close when he listened, eyes fixed on mine as if my answers mattered. And for reasons I couldn't fully understand, I wanted to give them to him. But Mason was always there, somehow, interrupting or redirecting. He would enter the room at just the right moment, cutting off words that felt too fragile to finish. His timing wasn't coincidence. I knew it, even if I couldn't prove it. Once, when Ryder brushed my arm lightly in passing, Mason's eyes caught mine, steady and unyielding, as though reminding me someone else was always watching. It was Julian, though, who unsettled me the most. He didn't speak much, yet when he did, his words lingered. Late one evening, when the others had drifted off, he caught me in the hallway. "You don't know what you've stepped into," he said quietly, not looking at me but at the shadows stretching across the wall. I asked what he meant, but he only shook his head and walked away. I lay awake that night, replaying the sentence, wondering if it was a warning or a threat. By the end of that first week, I couldn't ignore the shift in the air. My home no longer felt like mine. Every room carried their presence. Every silence was crowded. There was something beneath the surface of their easy smiles and casual words, something I wasn't meant to see but kept brushing against. And then one night, as I passed by the cracked door of Grant's room, I heard it, whispers, hurried and urgent. "He doesn't suspect," a voice murmured. "Not yet. Keep it that way." I froze in the hallway, my hand pressed against the wall, as if it could steady the racing in my chest. They were talking about me. I knew it in my bones. I crept back to my room, heart pounding, replaying the fragments I'd overheard. Questions crowded my mind, pressing in from all sides. What didn't I suspect? What were they hiding? And why? When Ryder's laughter echoed faintly through the thin walls, did part of me still want to believe he was the one person I could trust? I didn't have answers, but I knew one thing for certain. The cousins hadn't just come to stay. They had come with a purpose. And somehow, I was at the center of it. The whispers I overheard refused to leave me. They clung to the edges of my thoughts during the day and haunted the silence of my nights. Every glance, every pause in conversation, every unexpected laugh among them carried a hidden weight. Yet Ryder, with his restless charm, kept pulling me closer. I found myself searching for him, listening for his voice in a room, and when he caught my gaze, I felt an unspoken promise hanging between us. It was reckless, maybe even foolish, but something about him disarmed me. We began to linger together when Grant was gone and Mason wasn't hovering. Ryder had a way of turning ordinary moments into confessions. One night, sitting across him at the kitchen table, the dim light falling across his face, he asked me what I was most afraid of. I tried brushing it off with humor, but he didn't let me. He leaned forward, eyes steady, and waited. Something in me broke open, and I admitted things I rarely voice aloud, that I'd grown used to being overlooked, that trust didn't come easily, that sometimes I wondered if anyone had truly seen me. Ryder didn't laugh or shrug it off. He listened like the words mattered, like I mattered. He told me that I deserved more than shadows, more than waiting for people to notice. His hand brushed against mine on the table, deliberate but gentle, and though I didn't pull away, my heart raced with a mix of fear and anticipation. It was the first time in a long while I felt something more than routine. Mason, however, seemed determined to keep us apart. He started appearing at odd moments, asking Ryder to help with errands, stepping into the room just as our conversations edged into intimacy, redirecting the energy with his careful, steady tone. He wasn't unkind, but there was a barrier in his presence. He watched me like a guardian or a sentinel, and though his words were casual, his eyes carried warnings I couldn't decipher. Julian remained quieter than the others, but his silence became louder with time. Sometimes I'd catch him in the corner of the living room, his eyes fixed on me as though he was unraveling a puzzle. Other times, he slipped by without acknowledgement, his presence ghost-like. I could never tell if he disapproved of Ryder's closeness to me, or if he understood something neither of us wanted to say aloud. His stillness was both unnerving and oddly grounding, as if he carried truths the rest of them avoided. Grant grew stranger, too. He stopped teasing me the way he used to, stopped asking about my day, or bothering me with his careless jokes. He still filled the space with his noise, but it felt like a mask, his laughter ringing false. At first, I thought maybe he was jealous that Ryder and I had grown close, but then I remembered the whispers, the arguments behind closed doors. Something bigger was happening, something Grant was trying and failing to hide. One evening, Ryder and I ended up on the balcony, the air heavy with summer heat. The city lights glimmered below us, and for a while, we just stood in silence. Then, without warning, he said, "I don't know why I'm telling you this, but I feel like I can't keep it anymore." His words trembled with honesty. He admitted that he wasn't supposed to get close to me, that things were already complicated between him and his cousins. But he couldn't seem to stop himself. His eyes searched mine, raw and uncertain, as though waiting for me to turn away. Instead, I stepped closer. The air between us charged with something I couldn't explain, and before I realized it, his hand found mine again, this time holding firmly. For a fleeting moment, it felt simple, two people finding each other in the middle of chaos. But the simplicity shattered the next morning. As I passed by the kitchen, I heard Grant and Mason speaking in hushed tones. "You should have told him already," Mason said, his voice sharp. "Not yet," Grant answered quickly. "If he knows too soon, it'll ruin everything." My stomach dropped, and I froze in place. The words struck with the weight of a confession. Him. They were talking about me again. And this time, it wasn't just suspicion. It was certainty. I backed away before they noticed me, my pulse pounding in my ears. My trust in Grant, already fragile, began to crumble. He had dragged his cousins into our home with a purpose. And whatever that purpose was, it revolved around me. I wanted to run, to distance myself from all of them. But Ryder's face kept surfacing in my mind. His honesty on the balcony, his trembling voice admitting he wasn't supposed to care. It didn't match the secrecy in Grant's words. The contradiction gnawed at me. I was caught between two truths, one that told me I was being deceived, and another that whispered love could be real even in the middle of deception. And though I hated myself for it, I wanted to believe Ryder. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The apartment hushed around me. I thought of Julian's warning, Mason's interruptions, Grant's laughter that wasn't laughter at all, and Ryder's hand wrapped tightly around mine. I didn't know what they were keeping from me, but I knew the secret was closing in. And as much as I wanted to hold on to the warmth Ryder offered, I couldn't escape the growing certainty that when the truth surfaced, it would break more than my trust. It would break my heart. The days that followed carried an edge I couldn't shake. Every interaction with Grant, Mason, and Julian seemed loaded. Their glances weighted with unspoken knowledge. Even Ryder, who felt like my one refuge, began to carry contradictions in his expression, warmth in his smile, hesitation in his eyes. The apartment, once a place of routine, had become a stage where everyone else seemed to know their lines except me. One evening, Ryder caught me pacing in the living room. "You've been distant," he said softly, leaning against the doorframe. His voice was gentle, but it carried an urgency I hadn't heard before. I hesitated, then asked the question that had been eating at me. "What are you and the others keeping from me?" For a moment, his expression flickered, guilt flashing across his face before he masked it with a crooked grin. "You're imagining things," he said, but his tone lacked conviction. I wanted to push, to demand answers, but the way he stepped closer, his hand brushing mine as though to anchor me, made my chest tighten. He whispered, "I didn't plan this. I didn't mean for it to be you." The words hung in the air like smoke, leaving me grasping for clarity that never came. That night, I heard raised voices through the thin walls of the apartment. Mason's deep, steady tone carried through first. "You're crossing a line, Ryder. He was never supposed to matter to you." "I can't help it," Ryder snapped back, his voice sharp with frustration. "He's not just some part of your plan. He's a person. You think that changes anything?" Mason shot back. "Grant made it clear we stick to it." My chest tightened as I pressed closer to the wall, straining to catch every word. Grant's voice joined in, calm but commanding. "We agreed. No feelings, Ryder. That's not what this was about." I stumbled back from the wall, bile rising in my throat. They weren't just keeping something from me. They were using me. Whatever plan Grant had orchestrated, Ryder had been part of it from the beginning. The warmth of his touches, the sincerity in his questions, the confessions on the balcony. It all twisted into something jagged and cruel under this new light. The next day, I tried to avoid them, but Ryder cornered me in the stairwell. "You heard, didn't you?" His voice was strained, his eyes searching mine. I didn't answer, but my silence was enough. "I never wanted it to be like this," he said quickly. "Yes, Grant brought us here for a reason, but what I feel for you, that's real. You have to believe me." Anger flared in me, burning through confusion. How can I believe you when everything started with a lie? You were part of it, Ryder. You all were. He reached for me, but I pulled back. His face crumpled, pain flickering across it. "I can't undo the beginning," he whispered, "but I can choose what happens now." Mason appeared at the top of the stairs, his presence heavy and unyielding. "Enough," he said firmly. "This isn't helping." He looked at me, his eyes colder than I'd ever seen them. "You weren't supposed to find out like this." The casual cruelty in his tone made my stomach turn. "Find out what?" I demanded, my voice shaking. What exactly was I supposed to be? Julian, who had been silent for days, finally stepped forward from behind Mason. His voice was low but steady. "A test," he said simply. "Grant wanted to see if you could be trusted, if you bend or break. We were part of it. We were all supposed to push to see how far you'd go." The words slammed into me, stealing my breath. I stared at them, Grant with his smug detachment, Mason with his steady resolve, Julian with his calm revelations, and Ryder, who looked like he was unraveling before my eyes. Betrayal had a face now. It wasn't just one. It was all of them. I left them standing in the stairwell, my chest hollow, my mind a storm. Back in my room, I shut the door and pressed my back against it, fighting the wave of emotions tearing through me. I thought about every laugh I'd shared with Ryder, every moment of trust I'd handed over piece by piece. And now I knew I had been nothing more than an experiment, a pawn in Grant's twisted design. Yet, beneath the anger and heartbreak, Ryder's words kept echoing. What I feel for you, that's real. I wanted to dismiss it as another layer of deception, but the look in his eyes when he said it haunted me. If everything had been a lie, why did his pain look so genuine? That night, the apartment felt suffocating. I could hear them moving in the other rooms, voices low, conversations cut off whenever I passed by. Every sound made my skin crawl. I didn't know if I could stay, but I didn't know how to leave either. My life had been entwined with theirs before I even realized a trap had been set. As I lay in the dark, Ryder knocked softly at my door. I didn't answer, but he spoke through the wood, his voice breaking. I wasn't supposed to fall in love with you, but I did. The words cut through me, leaving me torn between fury and longing. I wanted to open the door, to see if his eyes carried the truth I craved. But I stayed still, silent, caught between the shards of betrayal and the fragile possibility of love. And as the night stretched on, I realized the real question wasn't whether Ryder's feelings were genuine. It was whether I had the strength to let myself believe them. I didn't open the door that night, and Ryder's footsteps eventually faded into silence. But his words clung to me, echoing in the corners of my mind until morning light filtered through the blinds. I wasn't supposed to fall in love with you. It should have meant nothing after everything I'd learned. Yet the tremor in his voice refused to let me dismiss it as another performance. The next day, the apartment felt like a battlefield. Grant carried himself with the smug calm of a man who thought he was still in control. Mason moved through the space like a soldier on duty, vigilant and unyielding. Julian remained watchful, though now his silence carried something heavier, almost remorseful. And Ryder, he avoided my eyes, lingering near me but never close enough to touch. I couldn't bear the weight of it any longer. In the living room, with all of them present, I demanded the truth. No more whispers, I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. No more games. I want to know why. Why me? Grant leaned back on the couch, his arms stretched along the cushions as though this were nothing more than casual conversation. Because you're easy to underestimate, he said with a faint smirk. You keep to yourself quiet, guarded. I wanted to see how far I could push you before you broke. The admission struck harder than I expected. My roommate, someone I'd trusted enough to share a home with, had turned me into an experiment, a curiosity to toy with. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my voice steady. And the others? They agreed to this. Mason didn't flinch. We followed Grant's lead. We thought we were protecting you, in a way, testing your strength before someone else could exploit it. His tone carried no apology, only justification. Julian finally spoke, his voice low and almost regretful. I knew it would end like this. You were never supposed to be a puzzle we solved. You were supposed to be a person we respected. But I didn't stop it. That's on me. Ryder rose from where he had been sitting, his voice breaking. It was never supposed to go this far. Yes, I agreed at first. I played along. But somewhere in the middle of it, I stopped caring about the plan and started caring about you. I can't take back the beginning, but I swear to you, everything I feel now is real. His words cut through me, leaving me torn between fury and fragile hope. I looked at him, searching for deception, but all I saw was desperation. Grant, however, laughed, shaking his head. You always were too soft, Ryder. Falling for him was your mistake. That laugh snapped something in me. I turned to Grant, my voice shaking with both rage and clarity. No, the mistake was thinking I'd let you control me. You want to see if I'd break? Well, I'm not broken. I'm done. For the first time, Grant's confidence faltered, his smirk wavering. Mason shifted uncomfortably. Julian dropped his gaze. But Ryder's eyes never left mine. I packed that night. Every item I placed in the bag felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Ryder hovered near the doorway, silent until I zipped the bag shut. "If you walk away now," he whispered, "I don't blame you. But please believe me when I say I never wanted to hurt you. I love you." I paused, the weight of his words pressing hard against the walls I'd built. Part of me wanted to stay, to test the truth of his love. But another part knew the wound was too fresh, the betrayal too deep. Love couldn't grow in soil poisoned by lies, no matter how sincere his eyes seemed now. As I stepped past him, he reached out, his fingers grazing mine. I stopped, my heart battling itself, but I didn't turn back. "Maybe one day," I said quietly, "but not today." His hand fell away, and I walked out the door. Outside, the night air wrapped around me, cool and bracing. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The city stretched ahead, filled with uncertainty, but at least it was mine. I didn't know what future waited for me, whether Ryder's confession would echo in my heart or fade with time. But as I walked farther from that apartment, I understood something with startling clarity. Betrayal had broken me open, but it had also forced me to see my own strength. Grant had set out to prove I could be bent, manipulated, and tested. Instead, he proved something else entirely. Even in the face of deception, I still had the power to choose myself. And as painful as it was to leave Ryder behind, I knew this was only the beginning of a story I would write for myself, one not shaped by anyone else's plans, but by my own.